There's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door. Open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in.
All right, let the King of Glory in. Open up the door starts right now. So fling wide, you heavenly gates. Prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was in prison for the testimony of Jesus Christ, and he heard a sound behind him, and he said, behold, I looked. There was a door standing open in heaven, and I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends. We need a heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us, the things that the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now. That is what this broadcast is all about, discussing the issues of the day, discerning the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and worldview. Good afternoon, everybody. Andy White here, and what you are about to hear is the fusion of heart, mind, and soul. And I want to welcome everybody from all across the fruited plain and all around the, you know what it is, the spherical globe. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Open Up the Doors. And do me a favor, I am streaming live on my YouTube channel. Over there on YouTube, Andy White, Open Up the Doors. If you've never subscribed to the channel, you can go over there, subscribe to the channel, catch the broadcast live streaming, join the conversation over there. Please introduce yourselves one to another from all across the fruited plain. Let it be a great big meet and greet on the Open Up the Doors YouTube channel there. And let me know where you are listening from. As always, we are, of course, broadcasting live from the east end of Long Island at the Faith FM studios. But if you are outside of the Faith FM radio coverage area, the best way to listen to Faith FM is to download the free Faith FM app over at the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, whatever your platform is. Just do the search for Faith FM. The app is free, and you'll be able to listen to great Christian programming 24/7 all around the spherical globe. The app is the best way to listen to Faith FM outside of the radio coverage area, of course. You can also follow me on Parler at AJ White 777. I'm on Parler. Join me over there, AJ White 777. All right, I think that covers my preliminaries for now. I want to try and get to things a little bit quicker than I have in the past, because I'm always running out of time and I've always got so much to share, and there's so much going on. And here we go again. Here we go again, folks. One more time around the mountain of the anti-Second Amendment people and the gun-grabbing leftists in Congress. Yes, I'm going to talk to you today because there's a whole slew of bills. They've gone off the rails. There's like a deluge of anti-Second Amendment bills now flooding the Congress. And I want to just talk about these issues today because it's getting dangerously close. I can only hope that we can only hope that all of these egregiously unconstitutional and anti-Second Amendment bills that are being pushed through the Congress right now, we can only hope they die in the Senate. But once again, folks, they're trying to infringe upon your right to self-defense. And they're attempting once again to violate, and I use that word in the most purposeful way, to violate your right to bear arms, to keep and to bear arms. And like I said, this time around, they're dangerously close to getting their way. And I'm going to get into the some of these bills later on in the broadcast. because there's a whole slew of them. And I obviously don't have the time to get into the weeds of every single bill. I'm going to try and be concise with them. But I want to bring out more of even though we're going to deal with that, I want to bring out more of a philosophical, I don't even know if that's the right word to use. I want to lay a foundation. One of the bills that's coming out that is probably the worst of them all, or it's really an aggregate of all of them. There's about 6, 7, 8 bills out there. But H.R. 127 is so completely egregious and unconstitutional on so many levels. But I'll get to that a little bit later. But right now, I want to first establish a solid foundation. Now, listen to me, folks. I know a lot of you in this audience, you're really going to know a lot of what I'm sharing right now. A lot of this information that I want to share with you right now, the information and really our philosophical foundation, if I could use that phraseology. I know a lot of you already know it, but I want this broadcast to be something that you could share with your friends. And I want it to be something that really you can use as a resource. So I obviously can't be exhaustive on the whole thing, but I want to lay a sure foundation. Because what they're trying to do is take away our rights and try and convince us that our Second Amendment rights are really not natural and God-given rights, but that rather they're privileges granted by the state. Our Second Amendment rights, are they privileges or are they rights? Well, they're rights, but we'll get into this. Most of us know the brevity and the clarity of the wording of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The Second Amendment, folks, is the shortest and perhaps the most clearly written in plain language of all the amendments. Yet, the power-drunk elitists, as well as all the ill-informed and quite honestly ignorant and mal-educated gun-grabbers, they never cease to try and twist and confuse the simple language of the Second Amendment to mean something other than what it actually means. For instance, the gun-grabbers like to focus on the very first words, a well-regulated militia. And they take that phrase to try and obfuscate the issue. But in doing so, they also at the same time attempt to redefine what the phrase actually means, ignoring the very definition of the word militia, both inherently and historically contained within what a militia is. See, they want you to think and they want you to believe that the word militia is referring to the military or a police force, but that is not the meaning of the term, a well-regulated militia. And no matter how much they would like you to think that is what it means, and though they insistently, or I should say incessantly insist, but they insist upon it as well, but they incessantly insist that this is what gives them the word to regulate. You see, a well-regulated military. That's not what it says. That's not even what it means in the original language, which is simple. But they insist that what gives them the power to regulate the Second Amendment is right there in those first few words. But that is a completely illegitimate usage of the phrase and an abuse of plain language. The fact is, folks, the term well-regulated militia does not mean and has never meant a standing army or a nationalized military or police force. A militia, by definition, is a civilian army, a civilian defense force, which in itself necessarily demands an armed citizenry, which is precisely why the entire Second Amendment reads, and must read, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people. Are you a people? You're a people. the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Who and what is the militia according to our founding fathers? It's not hard to find out, folks. You know, those guys who actually wrote the Constitution, those guys who actually put those words into the Bill of Rights in the Second Amendment there, you know what they thought and believed the militia was? It was George Mason himself who fought for the Bill of Rights to be included in the Constitution during the Constitutional Convention. The Bill of Rights was not originally part of the Constitution. The Constitution was ratified in 1787. The Bill of Rights came in a few years later because they had a fight to get these individual rights in there. And George Mason was the leader in that. And his wording in the Second Amendment is enshrined there. And I want to be clear about something here. George Mason was adamant. He was adamant concerning individual rights over the power of the state. And he said that the militia is, quote, the whole of the people. It's every man, it's every woman. Quote, George Mason, that the people have a right to mass and to bear arms, that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, because that is what a militia is, composed of the body of the people trained to arms, is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. Now, the quote doesn't end there, and I want you to hear this. A militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state, and that standing armies, our military, standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty and therefore ought to be avoided. You need to understand something here, folks. Our founding fathers did not believe in a standing army like the British. It was a militia. It was the militia in the states and in the colonies that fought the British. Now, I'm saying this not to impugn our military. There is a place for that. I'll get to that later. But I want to build from the ground up about where our rights come from. And George Mason said to disarm the people is the most effectual way to enslave them. And trust me, I can give you hundreds of quotes on this, but I obviously don't have the time to do that. I've got to be concise with this. But so often you hear people say, and I got into an argument with somebody, a constitutional teacher, by the way, a couple of years back. And he said, well, you know, the words in the Second Amendment, they're rather vague and ambiguous. No, they're not. And I told this guy, no, they're not. It's simple and plain language. The only people that make them ambiguous are lawyers who try to twist them into meaning something that they don't mean. It was plain language. People knew what the militia was. People knew what these things meant. And if you happen to think wrongly, but if you happen to think that they were vague in what they meant by a militia, you know what? It's not hard to find out what it is they meant, because there's this thing called the Federalist Papers, which were debates and letters and arguments that were being written and discussed amongst the framers and amongst those who were drafting up the Constitution at the time. So you can go back and you could look at what those guys actually wrote and what they meant by what they wrote. It's really not hard to do. These things exist. You're not sure what they meant by militia? Go look it up, because there's hundreds and hundreds of quotes of what the militia is, and it never referred to a standing army. And the framers of the Constitution, they got their ideas of a militia actually both from pure and simple secular history, but also biblical precedent. We see throughout the Bible what a militia is throughout the tribes of Israel. Go and read the book of Nehemiah. In Nehemiah chapter 4, you see, again, I can't go through the whole chapter, but I want you to see and to understand what's plain and evident. In Nehemiah 4, we read, I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose, and I said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them, meaning the enemies of Israel that were stopping them from rebuilding Jerusalem and rebuilding the wall. And Nehemiah says, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord God great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Go and read Nehemiah chapter 4. That's a militia. All the people, all the men, all the women armed with the right to defend life, liberty, and property. And as I said a moment ago, George Mason was the original author of the Second Amendment, which was finally realized into the Constitution in 1791 as the Bill of Rights. Not the Bill of Suggestions, not the Bill of Privileges, but the Bill of Rights for the people. And he said, and James Madison, who was the one who drafted up the Constitution and made sure that the Bill of Rights got into the Constitution after fighting for it for several years, James Madison said, in regard to all of our rights, but in context of this quote, specifically the Second Amendment, James Madison said, the ultimate authority is the Congress. No, he didn't say that. The ultimate authority are the elitists in Washington, D.C. No, he didn't say that. He said the ultimate authority, wherever the derivative may be found, resides in the people alone. And there have been court cases and court cases and court cases, Supreme Court cases throughout our history that upheld the Second Amendment as an individual right. But the most recent one was in 2008 in a SCOTUS case called District of Columbia versus Heller. And in that D.C. versus Heller case, the Supreme Court held that that self-defense was the central component of the amendment. Furthermore, the Supreme Court also affirmed previous rulings that the Second Amendment ensured the right of individuals to take part in the defending of their liberties by taking up arms in an organized militia. And they also stressed this. However, they said, the court was also clear to emphasize that an individual's right to an organized militia is not the sole institutional beneficiary of the Second Amendment's guaranteed. In other words, you have a right to bear arms as an individual, and that right cannot be infringed by the Congress, and you also have a right, if you want to and choose to be part of the militia. It's two things. But you can't be part of a militia if you're not armed yourself, because it is a civilian army. Congress has no right to infringe upon our Second Amendment rights, but that is exactly what they are in the process of trying to do right now. And I went through a little bit of that, like I said, but trust me, it's only a little bit. It's only a little bit of history to get to this point. The right of the people. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The right of the people. Where did that right come from? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Certain unalienable rights. That's why it's called the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. The Constitution was affirming and setting up the law of the land based on the Declaration of Independence. And bear in mind, please bear in mind, that what the framers meant, among many things, when they said the pursuit of happiness, it was your inalienable and biblical right to your own private property. For instance, thou shalt not steal is a commandment of the law of God. And the point is, and I've taught on this before, it presupposes the sanctity of personal property. And that's exactly what the Bible does. We read in Exodus, the law of Moses. God gave the law of Moses to him on the mountain. And in Exodus 22, 2 and 3, it says, if a thief is found breaking in, and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. And there are other scriptures, but that's a primary one, showing again our natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Because the Word of God upholds the sanctity of your life, liberty, and property. They are inalienable rights. They are self-evident, as our founders said. They are God-given rights. They are not privileges granted by the state. In fact, it is against constitutional law to even turn a right into a mere privilege. I'm gonna share a case with you. I think it was from I forgot the year, 1936 or there was a case where it was flat out said in this court case. Maybe I'll jump to it now since I'm here. I meant to share this really later, but there's a court case that flat out said. Let me just skim through my notes here. Murdoch versus Pennsylvania, Supreme Court case. You see, again, these people, these elitists in D.C., they're trying to subtly, and sometimes not too subtly, they're trying to turn our natural-born rights into state-sanctioned privileges. If the state gives you privileges, they can take them away. If the state gives you quote-unquote rights, they can take them away. That's why the framers said that we have certain unalienable rights from our Creator. In this case, Murdoch versus Pennsylvania, 1943, the court said, quote, "No state shall convert a liberty, which is a right, into a privilege. No state shall convert a liberty into a privilege, license it, and charge a fee for it. Can't be done. It's against the Constitution to even try it." But this is exactly what it is they're trying to do. So again, I'm just trying to lay out a foundation here for where I want to go with this, because I think it's important. If the foundations be if the foundation be shaken, what shall the righteous do? Because we have a God-given right, brothers and sisters, a God-given right to keep and to bear arms in order to defend my life, my liberty, my family, my property. A God-given natural right that no government has a right to take away without cause, without reason, without due process. You see, if I have a right to life, we have the right to life. If I have a right to life, then I necessarily and inherently must have a right to protect and defend that life. If I have a right to liberty, then that necessarily means I have a right to protect and defend that liberty. If I have a right to pursue happiness, which can mean many different things, but not the least of which, and most importantly, is the fulfilling of both my God-given responsibilities and the liberty to pursue my dreams, then I have a right to defend those things as well. I have to defend my family, to pursue the pursuit of happiness. I want my family to be protected and happy. And you know, this can just evolve into a whole slew of things. But this is the foundation. And what I want to share before I go to a break is that God has set up a divine order which begins with Him. We're talking about, in part, our right to self-defense. And so often I hear people say, well, I just trust God. Well, so do I. But that's not the whole. Hear me out. Because God has a divine order of things. I 100%, I 1000% agree with the sentiment that the Lord is the defense of my life. I absolutely do. My first line of defense is the Lord. For the angel of the Lord encamps about all those who fear Him. The psalmist said in Psalm 94, "Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? Unless the Lord had been my help, my soul would have settled in silence. But the Lord has been my defense and my God and the rock of my refuge." I absolutely believe that the Lord is the strength of my life and my defense. Absolutely believe that. But there's more. Secondly, I have a right as well when my enemies and foes come against me. I do have a right to take up arms, to defend my life, my liberty, my family, my property. Just shared already out of Exodus a little bit, out of Nehemiah chapter 4 a little bit. We have the biblical precedent for, yes, we rely on the Lord, but at the times that the enemy breaks in through for any reason, we have a responsibility to protect our family, our loved ones, and our neighbors. And thirdly, because there's a chain of command here, God first, then your authority over your family, and then the lawful instituted government. God has instituted lawful governing authorities to bear the sword. We know about that in Romans 13, where it says that the authority does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. So then there is a God-given legitimate function for civil authorities to protect against the infringement of life, liberty, and happiness and property. That's the proper order, folks. God first, then my personal responsibility as a first responder, and lastly, the government. You see, the government is on the bottom of the ladder, not the top. But the statists and the elitists have really flipped it upside down and put it on its head. The government is the third level, not the first. I'm the first responder to protect my family, not 911. I'll dial 911. I'll pray for the police to come, but they're not the first responder in an emergency. I am. You are, and that's why we have a Second Amendment right, a God-given right. Let me finish this segment with this, because there's something I want to add here, and I think most of us know this because so many have talked about it. But being that the government is the third level of God's delegated authority, you need to understand it's also mitigated. The government is mitigated under the auspices of whether they are in fact acting as God's ministers of righteousness. Paul says they are God's ministers of righteousness. Well, that's if they're acting that way, by upholding natural law. But if they're acting as a tyrannical and godless force, then they what's the word I'm looking for? They're disqualified as being God's ministers. Romans 13 is not a passage, though so many use it this way. Romans 13 is not a passage of Scripture to be used in an absolute, unqualified, and unmitigated way. God institutes governments to uphold natural and moral law. The moment they fail to do that, they violate his purpose, and they become a tyrannical government not sanctioned by God. And in those cases, we ought to obey God rather than men. And that's Bible, and I'll be back in a minute. Let's take a little music break here. Here's a tune by Misty Edwards called Mystery. Take a Selah moment.
You're a mystery.
I'll be back in a minute, folks.
Poetry.
Stick around.
Like a parable, a rhyme or a riddle. I want to search you out.
I want to search you out, Lord. Amen. Sweet tune by Misty Edwards. Welcome back. Andy White here. You are listening to Open Up the Doors here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Nepegue, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. And I want to get right back into the things I'm sharing because there's so much here. I said at the top of the show, there's a whole slew of bills going through Congress. There's like 6, 7, 8 of them that I want to kind of just buzz through to give you an idea what's going on. But before I do, let me give you this quote. I love these quotes because they are so poignant and they're so spot on. Like I said in the first block, for people who think this stuff is ambiguous or nebulous, they could not be more wrong. But Samuel Adams in Massachusetts in 1788, after the Constitution had been adopted by the Constitutional Congress, the states had to ratify it. So these guys all went back to their home states, and they began to explain what the Constitution was to the people in their states. And what's interesting about this quote from 1788, this quote is before the Bill of Rights was introduced into it. Remember, as I said, George Mason was trying to really push for the Bill of Rights to be put into the Constitution. He was very concerned about your individual rights over the power of the state. George Mason refused to even sign the Constitution until the Bill of Rights were put in. But Samuel Adams, when he went back to his state, he said to the people, when he was explaining these different aspects of the Constitution, he said this, quote, "The Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms." And yet, this is what we see on a daily basis coming from our Congress today. An attack on peaceful, law-abiding citizens. They say it's to curb crime. But again, we all know criminals don't obey the laws. And the Second Amendment says the rights of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Do they not know the meaning of the word infringe? Maybe they need to open up a dictionary or something. I don't know. It's you can find these things out. There are these things called dictionaries. In case you guys in Congress don't understand what the word infringe means, to encroach upon in a way that violates the law or the rights of another, to actively break the terms of a law or agreement, like the terms of our Constitution. You shall not infringe upon our rights. To infringe implies an encroachment. Oh, even so stealthily, like they've been doing. You know, our Second Amendment rights have already been infringed to such an egregious point. They're clearly violating their oath to uphold the law of the land. I know it's mind-boggling to me, folks, that this Congress, and we've been seeing this happening for years, but this Congress, because they're in power now, and they hold the reins of power in the White House and in the Senate. They're gone off the rails with all of these different bills that are out there. I'm gonna breeze through them really quick to show you what's going on. Some of them are worse than others. Two of the biggest ones are H.R. 8 and H.R. 27, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the other day they passed in the Congress H.R. 30. Which was to increase public safety by punishing and deterring firearms trafficking. Now, I read that several times. I'm like, wait a minute. You know what? Let's call this H.R. 30. Let's create more laws to cover for the laws that already exist but aren't being enforced. Because they're passing a new bill to punish and deter firearms trafficking. We already have that, but they don't enforce it. But let me move on. H.R. 127, to provide for the hiring of listen to this one. H.R. 121, to provide for the hiring of 200 additional ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms agents and investigators to enforce gun laws. Well, folks, listen, I am all for enforcing the law and for prosecuting criminals. Absolutely 100% for that. I am all for enforcing already existing and constitutional laws. But it's kind of funny in this season that they want to hire additional ATF officers. What happened to defund the police? And aren't these the same folks that want to dissolve and abolish ICE? Hey, just asking for a friend. H.R. 125, to amend Title 18 of the United States Code to provide for a 7-day waiting period before a semi-automatic firearm, which is pretty much all of them, a silencer, armor-piercing ammunition, or a large-capacity ammunition magazine may be transferred. Now, again, some of this is just really more nonsensical nuisance laws that will only affect law-abiding people, but which would have zero effect with thugs and gangs on the streets. Here's a doozy of one. H.R. 130, this was passed the other day, I believe. in Congress. None of these have been passed in the Senate yet. And certainly I am praying, and I hope you are praying, that they all die on arrival in the Senate. Although, I don't know. It's too close. It's dangerously close. But H.R. 130 requires listen to this, requires the safe storage of firearms and ammunition. Now, again, it's a pretty stupid law, really, because most responsible gun owners already do that. And I get it that there's irresponsible people out there. But listen to how they want to enforce this. Because this is absurd. Because the nasty part of this is that they want to require the investigation. Are you keeping your guns in a safe? Are you keeping your guns in a federally approved safe? And they're going to require the investigation of reports of improper storage of firearms ammunition. In other words, if your neighbor happens to see a gun mounted on a rack, you know, in the old days, and I bet you some people, I got a bunch of people from Texas listening right now. Greetings to you guys out there in Texas. Thanks for tuning in. But I know, because I got relatives in Texas, that in Texas, they got people that have gun racks on their wall. They display their guns. Well, according to H.R. 30, you will get a $5,000 fine if your neighbor rats you out. And one day you're going to have the ATF. Open up. This is ATF. We are here to investigate. We have been informed that you have a gun up on a gun rack above your fireplace. Folks, not only is this absurd, it's actually a violation of your 4th, 9th, and 14th Amendment rights. The right to privacy. You know, we're always hearing about, which this is actually going to go into another law here that Nancy Pelosi just pushed this week. And this is when these bills are getting even more dangerous, more unconstitutional, more egregious. H.R. 8. Because all of these bills kind of overlap each other, and they're all going to be really rolled into H.R. 127. But just the other day, Nancy Pelosi got pushed through what they're calling the Universal Gun Registration Bill, which bans all private firearm sales. I'm going to be quick with this. It's called the Bipartisan Background Checks Act of 2021, which would create absolutely universal background checks for firearm purchases. Now, bear in mind, you cannot walk into a store anywhere in the United States of America and buy a gun without a background check. That law already exists. What this H.R. 8 is really doing, it's banning private sales or even being able to give a gift. Let's say grandpa wants to give their grandson a shotgun for his birthday. Well, they're banning that unless you get a background check. Let's say grandpa died and his grandson inherited his hunting shotguns. Happens all the time. Well, that would be banned under H.R. 8 without a background check. Private sales and transfers. But even that, my friends, is really a backdoor method to get into a national gun registry, because it would be the only possible way to enforce it. That is the only way to enforce H.R. 8. It's a backdoor way to set up a national gun registration bill. And it is unconstitutional in so many ways. And it's really funny, because it's not funny, it's serious. Because let's just talk about grandpa's hunting rifle. Okay? He passes away and his grandson gets to inherit it. Well, that's family property. But now our government is coming in and saying, well, you're not entitled to do what you want to do with your private property. No, wait a minute. Wait. Didn't the Supreme Court, now you might think this is unrelated, but it's very related. In Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court emphasized a right to privacy. Now, I don't agree with the decision. I don't agree with what the court decided, but it is, quote unquote, the law of the land right now. And it was predicated upon the 4th, the 9th, and the 14th Amendment, a quote-unquote right to privacy. My body, my choice. You know the mantra. Well, what about my personal property, my choice? And I want to give my grandson a shotgun or a nice hunting rifle. Who is Big Brother? Who is the government to tell me what I can do with my body? I mean property. You see where I'm going with this? Because it's the same exact argument, folks. And they want to try and have it both ways. And it's unconstitutional. But their actual objective, really, when you get right down to it, is that they want a national gun registry. That's the intention. That is the objective. And there's only one reason the government would need a registry of gun ownership. And that's so they can go door to door collecting guns when they decide the time is right. And don't forget, it's exactly what they did do during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. The city went into a quote-unquote crisis mode, and rightfully so at the time. But the government went and they collected everybody's guns that they could find. And you know what happened when the government collected everybody's guns? The looting and the murders and the crime went through the ceiling because the people's right to defend themselves was taken away from them by the government. Everyone knows anything about history. Everyone knows a national gun registry has been the predicate and the precursor for every totalitarian government gun confiscation that has ever been done in history. This is exactly what every totalitarian, communist, fascist, socialist country has done from time immemorial. And it is an utter and egregious violation of our Second Amendment and God-given rights to keep and to bear arms. They want to turn your natural-born rights into a government-sanctioned privilege. But as I stated in the earlier part of this broadcast, that issue was settled in Murdoch versus Pennsylvania. No state shall convert a liberty into a privilege, license it, and charge a fee thereof. And here's the typical leftist mantra. Well, you have to get a license for a car. You need a license to drive a car. You need a license to cut somebody's hair. Why would you not have to register a lethal weapon? I saw somebody write this the other day on Parler, and he called us, our pro-Second Amendment people, a bunch of idiots. But I commented back to him because that comment was a dead giveaway of not understanding the difference between a right and a privilege. And I commented back, and I said, perhaps, my friend, instead of calling people idiots, you should do your own homework and get yourself an informed education, lest you show yourself to be the idiot. Since you don't seem to understand the difference between a privilege and a right according to constitutional law. And according to constitutional law, you cannot require a license nor a fee for a natural right. Let's charge a license and a fee for your right to speak, for your right to go to church. Oh, you want to go to church? You got to get a license. These are our constitutional rights. The Second Amendment is no different. And in another case, Shuttlesworth versus the city of Birmingham. And I read it into this case a little bit the other day. Again, I don't have the time to get into it all, but the Supreme Court said in this case, and this opens up a whole can of fish, wow. But the Supreme Court in 1963 said, if the state converts a right into a privilege, the citizen can ignore the license and fee and engage in the right with impunity. Wow. Now, this immediately raises a whole lot of questions, my friends. Why do I need a license then to fish and to hunt? Why do I need a license to do a whole host of things? It's a really good question, actually. Our founding fathers' heads would explode if they were alive today. So how did we get here? How do we make such a mess of things? The Second Amendment, as I said earlier, was written in the plainest and clearest language. I'll give you one word. It's called lawyers. Lawyers and powerful political elitists have turned some simple language into a monstrosity. The framers made the language of the Constitution readable for every average American citizen. And the Bill of Rights was never intended for lawyers to dissect and twist it into a pretzel with the changing winds of political expediency. And we've allowed lawyers and powerful political elites to twist and corrupt simple common language to the point that with legalese they can make anything mean anything they want, and usually to the detriment of everyone. And in some ways, I was thinking about this the other day, in some ways, it's why when Bill Clinton said, when asked the question, his famous quote, "It all depends on what the meaning of is." We all laugh at that, but he was actually making somewhat of a legitimate point as a lawyer, because this is exactly what they do. They play with words. And sadly, so often we, as lay people and as non-lawyers, we get trampled underfoot along with our rights. And we need to know how to fight back. And I'm sorry, we do need to know how to fight back. But the problem is we don't know how to fight back so often. And we lose the argument in the miasma of the legalese. And then too often we can't afford the cost of fighting back. So we simply acquiesce to the tyranny of the state. But I think at some point, and I got to go to a break, I'm over time by a lot. But I think at some point we may be getting really close to a point when the infringement of our rights and the tyranny of the state becomes so emboldened that it becomes an existential threat, to our liberties, that the very simple and plain language of our rights, be they the First Amendment or the Second Amendment or whatever have you, those plainly stated rights is what the common layman and the average person will grasp onto and stand upon. Elitists and tyrants, be warned. We will fight once again for our birthright. I have to take a break. Stick around, folks. I'll be back in a minute. Fusion of Heart, Mind, and Soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Epic, WEGQ 91.7 in Quad. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Such a happy tune. So glad you're tuned in here with me today. Hey, I got a few minutes left, but real quickly, if you've never subscribed to my a YouTube channel, please go on over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell next to the subscription button, and you'll be able to get notifications of when we go live and other things are posted to our YouTube channel. We want to make that channel a resource for the body of Christ. There's all kinds of things there. All these broadcasts are archived. Sermons I preach are archived. Also in my like section, you'll see sermons by others that you might be you might want to check out. We want it to be, like I said, a resource for you. Also have a Rumble channel as well, which is also a video hosting platform. For when the time comes that they might kick us off of YouTube. So go on over to Rumble. You could either subscribe to YouTube, subscribe to Rumble, subscribe to it all. We'll be one big happy family. Praise God. I want to go back because I only got literally a couple of minutes left, and I got enough here for another hour. So how do I want to wrap this up? There was this guy named Tench Cox during the revolutionary days. He was friends. He was a politician. He ran a newspaper. He was friends with all the founders. And in the Pennsylvania Gazette, remember early in the broadcast I had said how the founders were now trying to get the Constitution ratified, and they were fighting to get the Bill of Rights put into it. And in the Pennsylvania Gazette of February 20th, 1788, Trench Cox wrote this, quote, the militia of these free commonwealths, entitled and accustomed to their arms when compared with any possible army, must be tremendous and irresistible. Who are the militia? Are they not ourselves? Is it feared then that we shall turn our arms, each man against his own bosom? But Congress has no power to disarm the militia. Their swords and every other terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of an American. The unlimited power of the sword is not in the hands of either the federal, state, or the government, but where I trust in God, it will remain forever in the hands of the American people. You know, about 2 weeks ago, Israel, the Jews, celebrated Purim. And I don't have a whole lot of time, but go back and read the history of Purim. It's often forgotten that the climax of the book of Esther involves the Jews gathering together in an act of self-defense when a despotic king was persuaded to allow them to fight against their enemies. But before Esther's intervention, the king would have denied the Jews the right of self-defense. But after Esther's intervention, the Jews didn't merely look to law enforcement for their protection, but they took matters into their own hands. And Esther 8:11 says, the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, both women and children together. Don't misconstrue that phrase there, the king permitted them. In their situation, the words of the king was the law of the land. In our situation, the words of the Constitution is the law of the land. My friends, we've got to stand up for our rights. We've got to stand up for the things that we believe in as Americans. And we do this through prayer and through faith, through righteousness, but we have a righteous cause to stand up for, my friends. If these bills pass the Senate, they will make millions of Americans felons overnight. If these bills pass and they try to implement and enforce these unconstitutional violations of our rights, mark my words, people, this nation will be in deep trouble. But I gotta go. So in the meantime, watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong, and let all that you do be done in love, beloved. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back next week. God bless.